G'day folks, it's Rob here and welcome to another aquaponic design run through clip. This time around we're looking at a small courtyard aquaponic system that Matthew sent me. G'day Matthew. And we'll give a little bit of a walk through how he's laid it out, and then I'll follow up with the small tweaks that I do to it, just to basically run it the way I would if I was building it. So to begin with, looking at Matthew's system, we will start with the fish tank. Now the fish tank is something he's going to build himself. It's a little 3 meter long, 1 meter wide, half a meter tall fish tank. In the fish tank he has a pump, and that pump will be running the water under the floorboards up to a swirl filter, and then from there the water will exit the swirl filter and flow by gravity into the grow beds. And the grow beds, they're set up as flood and drain according to the information I've been given, and they will drain down into a sump tank that runs the center of the grow beds through what are probably bell siphons set up in the center of the beds. Now from that sump tank the water is traveling back to the other end of the fish tank through a pipe that is underneath the floorboards where it discharges into the fish tank. And he also intends to run the system on a timer, so the water won't always be flowing in the fish tank. Now, I personally don't like doing that. I prefer to let the system run 24/7 and also have an air stone in there to make sure that there's enough dissolved oxygen in there for the fish. If you do have a timer on the system, you definitely need to make sure that the total volume of that fish tank is passing through the media at least 1.5 times an hour, if not twice an hour, so all the waste from the fish can be processed by the bacteria from ammonia to nitrite and then into nitrate. The size of pump required for a timer system like this, I think you'd need at least a 6,000 to 8,000 litre an hour pump. The reason being is there is a lot of pipe friction here, flowing the water underneath the boards, and also lifting it up from the top of the water to the top of the swirl filter is going to be about 50 to 60 centimetres, so almost 2 foot. It does help to have that little bit of higher velocity in there. You can never have too much flow, a lot of people will say, so that's something to consider. Matthew's also said that he intends to enclose around the grow beds and the swirl filter with timber paneling, which I think is a fantastic idea. It'll make the area look a lot more schmicko and also hide a lot of the plumbing and parts underneath the grow beds. Thought I'd just run through a few points that Matthew might want to rethink on this layout, mainly because they could cause issues down the line, and then I'll cover how I would set up the system. So to begin with, we'll look at the fish tank. Now in the fish tank we have a pump. Now my problem with pumps in the fish tanks is that if something happens down the line, maybe the drain line coming back into the fish tank is interrupted somehow, you can end up pumping all the water out of your fish tank, basically killing your fish very quickly. So with the pumps, I always like to include them into a sump tank. So even if the pump does fail, there's a burst pipe or whatever, there is always going to be a constant height of water within the fish tank. And then you can have backup air or maybe an air stone in there already that can keep the fish alive until you can fix the problem with the system. Another issue you have with the pump in the fish tank is all those solids run through the pump, get broken down into finer solids before they make it out into the filter, making it harder for them to remove from the water column. Now just quickly back to the fish tank. Matthew was intending to build it out of timber and have a lid on top so he could sit on top of it. One of my big concerns here is that if people are kicking the side of the fish tank, those vibrations will drive the fish bonkers, especially if there's a lot of fish in the system. Not only that, if you've got a lid over the top of the fish tank all the time and then you're taking it off to feed them, I've found it can spook them a little bit. I found that out with my own fish. So what I tended to do was leave the lid a little bit ajar, and that way the fish didn't get as stressed when we came over the top of the tank. The next point that I'd just like to cover quickly is the swirl filter. I'm not a huge fan of the swirl filters, even though I have never built one myself. I've spoken to people who have run both swirl filters and radial flow filters, and I've also seen a paper, which I'll post a link to down below, that runs through a comparison between the swirl and the radial flow, and the radial flow filter comes out on top. So for me, my liking, I'd prefer to have a radial flow filter in there. You'll find you'll get a lot better separation of solids from the water column. From there, the water flowing into the grow beds, not a huge issue there. No problem having that coming through under gravity. The one issue I can see though is having the bell siphon set up in the center of the bed. That's mainly just due to ease of access. If you have a whopping great big tomato plant growing in there and it grows over the top of it, and you've got to get in there to try and get some of the roots out of the plumbing inside the bell siphon shroud, it just makes it a little bit harder if you have to reach over the top of the bed. What I'd do is I'd probably have the bell siphon just in one of the front corners. Just makes it a lot easier to work on, and also run your pipe work and maintain it underneath as well. So these little bits of pipe at the end of the feed line into the bed, they prevent an overflow happening. If any of the valves running into the grow beds block up, you won't have it back up into the filter and then overflow. It will basically run out this little collection of fittings down into the sump or the drain that would take the water back to the fish tank. The other thing you might want to consider is just moving the grow beds away from the wall a bit, so you've got better access for tending the plants. The next point is the sump tank under the grow beds. It doesn't really serve a purpose other than holding more water capacity, which could help to balance out the temperature of the water overall. But in a system like this, where you're pumping from a fish tank to a grow bed and then back into the fish tank, you really don't need a sump tank like that. It sort of just becomes a little bit of extra kit that you've got to build and maintain. So what I'd probably do is have the water flowing back into a central drain from the bell siphons and then have that return to the fish tank. It'll just cut down on some of the cost on the build itself. So that's just a couple of pointers that I have for Matthew on the system as it's laid out in his design. Now I'll run through the layout that I propose that Matthew have a crack at. Whether he does it or not, it's up to him. Matthew does want this in a courtyard situation. I do like the idea of having the grow beds to one side and a bit of a seating arrangement to the other side. And yeah, I think we can work around that so they can both be included. I'd still have the pump in what Matthew was calling the fish tank, except I'm calling it a sump tank. And I would have it plumbed up so it is in the split flow configuration. What that means is the flow is split between the fish tank and the grow bed side of the system. That'll make it easier to control the flow rate into the grow beds in case you're having any hassles with your bell siphons. Next to that sump tank, I'd have an IBC fish tank. Now what I would do is I would have the solids leaving the fish tank via a solids lifting overflow into the radial flow filter. As for the size of the radial flow filter, I pretty much will suggest a 200 litre drum to make the filter out of, and that'll give you a fairly long retention time, especially if you're running around about 1500 to 2000 litres of water through the fish tank every hour. So there is a school of thought, and I subscribe to it myself, that thinks that there should be some sort of biofiltration between the solids filtration, in this case a radial flow settler, and the sump tank. The reason being, because it's a split flow system, some of that water will end up back in the fish tank. And what we want to do is give it the chance to be worked upon by the naturally occurring bacteria to convert it from ammonia into nitrite and then into nitrate before it goes back into the fish tank. So this biomedia could be added into a standalone biofilter, or it could be just placed into some sort of a crate that can contain it within the sump tank itself, directly underneath the outlet from the radial flow filter, and that will allow the water to pass through that before it mingles with the other water from the grow beds and then gets pumped back through to the fish and the plant side of things again. Now as for pumps, if it was set up as a split flow, I think you'd still pretty much will need an 8,000 litre an hour pump, again because of the amount of pipe friction that you have in the system. It will be running down under the floorboards, up and along the back of the grow beds. Not only that, you've also got the extra line running from the pump and over to the fish tank as well. So something Matthew could do with the sump tank just for the kids is to pop 2 goldfish in there, just give them something to sprinkle a small amount of food into to feed and let them watch them as they swim around. And I don't think they'd generate enough waste to pose a problem if the water was pumped directly back into the fish tank at all. So underneath the grow beds, I'd still have a communal drain that collected all the water from the bell siphons in the grow beds and delivered it under the decking back into the sump tank itself. Now this system should work absolutely fine as long as the fish side of it isn't overstocked. Now I do have a clip up there looking at fish stocking rates, so you can go and check that out. There'll also be a link in the description below. And what it does is it gives you a bit of an idea on how many fish you can stock in your backyard system given the amount of biofiltration provided by your media-based grow bed, be them clay, rock, scoria or volcanic rock or expanded shale. So check that out if you want to know how many fish you can grow in your system. Now another idea that I think Matthew might want to think about is ditching building the fish tank and stick with using IBCs. What I'd do is I'd create a single loop aquaponic system on the side of the courtyard that has the grow beds. Depending on his space, he might need to remove one of those grow beds, or there might be enough. I'm not 100% sure on how much room he has. Now what I suggest you do is have a fish tank which takes water and solids created by the fish and drops them into a radial flow filter. Now that radial flow filter will then deposit the water directly out into the grow beds, and from there the water will fall naturally into a sump tank where there is a pump, and it can send the water back up into the fish tank. Now the grow beds themselves are biofilters, so you definitely don't need a biofilter. So you saved yourself some coin there on a drum and some media. Not only that, the fish tank on the other side would be expensive to build, knowing how much timber prices are here. I'd still clad the whole system up if you can, just to make it look a little bit more schmicko. One thing you can do with the fish tank is actually cut a little viewing window in the side, install some perspex in there, and then that way you can watch the fish swim by, you know, and they get a little bit more accustomed to you. It's a great little feature to add to your system, I think. So there you go, Matthew. I do hope that this clip has helped you out. Maybe iron out a few kinks, or even consider a different system altogether. And to everyone else who's watched the clip, I do hope you've enjoyed it, and maybe it's given you a couple of pointers for your upcoming design. If you have enjoyed it, it would be fantastic if you could give the video a thumbs up and maybe even subscribe to the channel. And it'd also be fantastic if you could share it around the social medias to your friends and family who might find it helpful as well. But I will pretty much all leave it there. I do hope you've enjoyed the clip and you've got something from it. Also hope your gardens and aquaponics are booming, and I will catch you next clip. Cheers all, have a top one.